What if your quiet hometown was hiding a ritual so dark it had claimed victims for generations, and no one ever spoke of it? When a teenage girl is found murdered in a farmhouse with her mouth sewn shut, one detective uncovers a terrifying pattern the town would kill to protect. It was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked at night. A small, tight-knit town tucked between rolling hills and endless fields. Safe, simple, unremarkable. At least, that's what everyone believed. Until the morning of March 12th. The sun rose like it always did over Halbrook, casting golden light over the quiet streets. But that morning, it wasn't birdsong or the rustling of trees that woke the town. It was a scream. A sound so sharp, so full of raw terror, that it echoed across the valley and settled deep in the bones of those who heard it. It came from the old MacArthur property on the outskirts of town, a dilapidated farmhouse no one had lived in for years. When the first officers arrived, they weren't prepared for what they would find inside. The walls were covered in dried blood. Symbols, strange, jagged runes, were carved into the wooden floors. And in the middle of the room, laid out like some grotesque ritual, was the body of a teenage girl. Jane Delaney, 17, missing for 4 days. Her eyes were open. Her mouth was sewn shut. Halbrook would never be the same again. Detective Eli Maddox had seen his share of dark cases, but there was something about this one that didn't sit right. Maybe it was the quiet. The way no one seemed to know, or claimed to know, how a girl could vanish in such a small town without a single witness. Or maybe it was the way the locals looked at him when he arrived, like he was already too late. The sheriff's office had called him in from the State Bureau. "Too big for us," they'd said. "We're not equipped for this kind of thing." And they weren't wrong. The crime scene looked less like a murder and more like a message. But who was it meant for? The autopsy report confirmed what Maddox already feared. Jane had been kept alive for 3 days. The wounds on her body told a chilling story of torture, controlled, methodical, and deliberate. Whoever did this hadn't just wanted her dead. They wanted her to suffer. The media storm hit fast. A small town, a brutal murder, a girl with no enemies and a perfect school record. It was the kind of story that headlines write themselves. But as the spotlight intensified, something strange happened. People stopped talking. Neighbors who once greeted each other with warm smiles now kept their doors shut. Friends of Jane's suddenly remembered very little about her last few days. And those who spoke up? They started disappearing too. 2 weeks after the discovery of Jane's body, Maddox received an anonymous letter slipped under his hotel room door. "She wasn't the first. She won't be the last. Stop digging or you'll be next." No name. No return address. Just the smell of smoke and the faint outline of a fingerprint smudged in ash. But Maddox wasn't the kind of man to back down. If anything, the letter confirmed what he already suspected. This wasn't a one-off killing. This was part of something bigger. Something older. He dug into the town's history. Halbrook, established in 1831, had its share of old folklore. Stories of shadowy figures in the woods, of children gone missing, of fires that started without reason and homes that burned with entire families inside. Rumors. Whispers. Urban legends. But as Maddox began cross-referencing missing persons reports from the past 50 years, a pattern started to emerge. Every 8 to 10 years, a teenage girl vanished. Always alone. Always under mysterious circumstances. And in almost every case, the town moved on like nothing had happened. Jane wasn't the first. But maybe, just maybe, she could be the last. Maddox returned to the farmhouse that night. Alone. The forensics team had already cleared out, and the property was taped off, marked for demolition. But he needed to see it again, without the flashing lights and noise. Just him, the house, and whatever truth was still hidden inside. He walked through the creaking halls, flashlight in hand, his boots echoing on the warped wood. The smell of decay still lingered, thick and heavy. He stepped into the main room, the site of the murder. Then he saw it. A small trapdoor in the corner, half covered by a rotting rug. The crime scene photos hadn't mentioned a basement. He knelt and pulled the door open. The hinges groaned. Cold air rushed up, smelling of dirt and mold. Maddox hesitated, then descended the stairs. What he found in the basement would change everything. A series of old photographs lined the walls, some torn, some burned. They were all of teenage girls. Dozens of them. Some he recognized from the missing persons reports. Others he didn't. And in the center of the room, on a table covered in dried wax and dark stains, was a book. Bound in cracked leather, its cover marked with the same runes carved into the farmhouse floor. Inside were pages of names, dates, and what looked like rituals, ceremonies involving blood, fire, and sacrifice. This wasn't a murder. This was a tradition. As he turned the pages, Maddox heard a creak above him. Footsteps. He wasn't alone. He turned off his flashlight and slipped into the shadows. Then the voice came, low and familiar. "I told you to stop digging, detective." Maddox held his breath. The voice had come from the top of the stairs, silhouetted by a faint glow, maybe a lighter or phone screen. Whoever it was, they weren't rushing in. They didn't have to. They knew he was there. And more importantly, they knew he had seen the book. "I warned you," the voice said again, slower this time. "But you couldn't let it go, could you?" Maddox remained perfectly still in the dark, his back pressed against the cold concrete wall of the basement. He could hear footsteps above, pacing deliberately. Then, silence. Maddox briefly turned on his flashlight to capture photos of crucial pages from the ritual book. The images revealed a list of names, mysterious symbols, and a page with Jane Delaney's death date circled in red, followed by an ominous blank line. He backed toward the stairs, careful not to make a sound, but the trapdoor slammed shut before he could reach it. But he aimed his light at the underside of the door. There was something scratched into the wood. A message. "Only the chosen return." Maddox knew he didn't have time to decode cryptic warnings. He scanned the basement quickly and spotted an old coal chute near the ceiling. Rusted but wide enough. With effort, he pried it open and pulled himself through, landing hard in the overgrown weeds behind the farmhouse. The house was empty when he circled back, no sign of the intruder. But the warning was clear. This wasn't just a cult. It was organized. It was watching him. And it had been for some time. The next morning, Maddox drove into town early. The streets were quiet, too quiet. Storefronts were shuttered. No kids at the bus stop. Even the local diner, usually packed with retirees by 7 a.m., was closed. A handwritten sign on the window read, "Closed for renovation." But Maddox could see the coffee still steaming on a table inside. Someone had left in a hurry. He stopped by the sheriff's office, hoping for backup, or at least a second opinion. But Sheriff Holden wouldn't meet his eyes. "Look, Maddox," Holden said, rubbing the back of his neck. "You're an outsider. You don't get how things work around here." "Then help me understand," Maddox replied. Jane Delaney was tortured. Her mouth was sewn shut. There are records of similar disappearances going back decades. "And you're telling me to drop it?" The sheriff sighed. "It's not about what I want. It's about what's best for Halbrook." "That sounds like a threat." "No," Holden said, finally locking eyes with him. "It's a warning." Maddox drove to the town's historical society next, tucked behind the church. It was run by an elderly woman named Margaret Renshaw, sharp eyes, long memory, and a reputation for keeping the town's oldest secrets. When he mentioned the runes, her hands trembled. "You saw the book, didn't you?" she asked quietly. Maddox didn't answer. He didn't need to. Margaret hesitated, then walked to a locked cabinet and pulled out an old binder wrapped in twine. Inside were yellowed newspaper clippings, handwritten notes, and photocopies of missing persons flyers dating back to the 1940s. "Every generation," she whispered. "It always starts with a girl." According to Margaret, Halbrook's founders had fled persecution in Europe in the 1800s. But they hadn't left everything behind. They brought something with them, a belief in an old god, something they called the Watcher in the Roots. Once a decade, a ritual was held to ensure the town's prosperity. It required a sacrifice. Always a young girl. Always chosen in secret by the inner circle, a group made up of Halbrook's most powerful families. In return, the town never suffered drought. Never saw famine. Businesses thrived. People lived long, healthy lives. But the price was always blood, Margaret said, tears in her eyes. I tried to expose it once. Back in '79. My sister was taken. They made it look like she ran away. Who's in the circle now? Maddox asked. Margaret didn't speak. She just slid a photograph across the table. Sheriff Holden. The mayor. The high school principal. The town doctor. All smiling. All younger. Standing beside an altar deep in the woods. That night, Maddox returned to his hotel, phone buzzing with messages from an unknown number. Photos. Grainy surveillance stills of him entering the farmhouse. Of him leaving the historical society. And one final image, taken from across the street. It was of his hotel window. He moved toward the curtains, then stopped. Whoever had sent the photos was watching him right now. His phone buzzed again. You're already part of it now. There's no way out. Maddox stared at the message, the weight of the truth sinking in. Jane had been chosen. So had the girls before her. And if the pattern continued, someone else was next. But who? And more importantly, could he stop it before the town chose again? Detective Maddox didn't sleep that night. He couldn't. The room felt like a cage, suffocating him with the weight of everything he'd uncovered. The town's secret. The ritual. The photographs. They were all connected, but the pieces still didn't fit. But why Jane? Why did the town's inner circle think they could get away with this? He sat at the desk, staring at the blurry surveillance photos, his mind racing. The last one, the image of his hotel room, made his skin crawl. It wasn't just a warning anymore. They were tracking him. They knew where he was every second of the day. He reached for his phone again, scanning through the latest messages from the anonymous number. Stop now or she's next. The watcher is waiting. The chilling words lingered in his mind, but it was the mention of she that caught his attention. There was only one person Maddox cared about in this town, his partner, Detective Laura Hayes. She'd been in Halbrook for years, one of the few people who didn't look at him like an outsider. They'd worked on cases before, but this one was different. The deeper Maddox dug, the more danger he brought to the surface. Laura had called him an hour ago. She'd been asking questions, pushing for information about the case, and when Maddox didn't respond, her concern had turned to suspicion. He needed to see her. Maddox met Laura at the diner, the only place in town still open at night. She was already sitting in a booth, her dark eyes fixed on him as he walked in. I don't like this, Sly, she said, her voice low. I've been asking around, people are talking. Not about Jane. About you. He slid into the booth across from her, glancing around before answering. What are they saying? Something's wrong with this case. I've heard rumors of a cult in the town. People who've disappeared. But it's not just the victims. It's you. They say you're digging too deep. I am, he admitted. And I don't think it's just a cult. I think this town has a secret. A deadly one. I found a book, Laura. Rituals, names, dates. Every 8 to 10 years, a girl goes missing. They keep coming back, and nobody says a word. Until now. Laura's brow furrowed. You're saying they've been sacrificing girls every decade? And now they're going to do it again? Maddox nodded. I think the town's inner circle is behind it. The sheriff. The mayor. The principal. All of them. Laura stared at him, silent for a long moment. Her hand trembled slightly as she pushed her coffee cup to the side. You're not alone in this. We'll figure it out together. But you're not going to like what I found. What did you find? Maddox asked, leaning in. There's something in the mayor's office. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's off. I've been trying to get access to his files for weeks, and every time, there's a reason I can't. She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder. I think it's time to confront him. The mayor's office was located in the oldest building in town, the stone facade weathered by years of neglect. It was a relic of Halbrook's founding, just like the traditions that had been passed down through the generations. Maddox and Laura stood in front of the building, their breaths visible in the crisp night air. Are you sure about this? Laura asked, her voice tight. We have to know what they're hiding, Maddox said. If this is going to stop, we need proof. They slipped inside, careful not to trigger the alarms. The mayor's office was locked, but Maddox had managed to get a set of spare keys, thanks to a contact he'd made in the department. Inside, the office was pristine, with wooden bookshelves lined with ledgers, old newspapers, and thick volumes of local history. But something caught Maddox's eye, an old, dusty ledger, tucked beneath a pile of papers on the mayor's desk. He pulled it out and flipped through the pages, each one filled with names, dates, and what seemed like a list of rituals, all tied to the same cycle. Every 10 years. Young girls, taken from their homes in the dead of night. And in the back of the book, there it was, a list of names dating back to 1831, the founding year of Halbrook. And at the very bottom of the list was Jane Delaney's name, circled in red ink. "This is it," Maddox whispered. "This is how they keep track of it all. The pattern. The sacrifices." Laura stepped closer, her hand resting on the desk as she looked over the names. But why Jane? She wasn't special. She wasn't part of the town's, the circle. Maddox paused, his eyes scanning the names. Then it clicked. No. It's not about her being special. It's about the timing. Every 10 years, they choose someone. And Jane's death, it's just the start. Start? Laura echoed. You think there are more? Before Maddox could respond, a noise from outside the office caught their attention. Footsteps. And then a voice, low and menacing. "I told you not to come back." It was the mayor. Maddox and Laura exchanged a glance, panic rising in their chests. They weren't alone anymore. The mayor's voice echoed through the old building like a blade slicing through still air. "I told you not to come back." Detective Maddox reached for his holstered weapon. Laura did the same. The hallway outside the office creaked beneath the weight of approaching footsteps, calm, deliberate, unhurried. This wasn't panic. This was confidence. The kind that comes from knowing no one's watching or caring. Laura whispered, "There's a fire escape through the clerk's office. If this goes sideways..." "No," Maddox said, voice firm. "We end this here." The door opened slowly, revealing Mayor Silas Granger, flanked by Sheriff Dunley and Principal Howell, their expressions devoid of surprise. Granger's voice was low and chilling. "You two could have walked away. But you stayed. You saw too much." Laura kept her gun trained on them. "You're behind this? The sacrifices, the book, Jane Delaney?" Granger gave a humorless smile. "We are Halbrook detectives. We are what keeps this town safe. What you call murder, we call balance. Every 10 years, the land demands blood. If we don't give it willingly, it takes it violently." Maddox's jaw clenched. "That's just a story. A myth to cover up a cycle of killings." Granger stepped forward. "Call it what you want. But every time a sacrifice is made, this town flourishes. Crops thrive. Disease disappears. Crime drops to near zero. Look at our history. It's all there." "And the people who disappeared?" Maddox barked. "The ones who talked? Who asked questions? They became liabilities," Sheriff Dunley said flatly. "Some left town. Others were handled." Maddox took a step closer. "You're not gods. You're killers playing pretend in a dying tradition." Granger's face darkened. "It's not pretend. It's protection. And now you are the threat." Suddenly, a fourth figure emerged from the shadows behind the trio, someone Maddox hadn't expected to see. Laura gasped. "No, that's not possible." It was Deputy Rachel Knox, young, green, and the one person Maddox believed was still clean. But her face gave it away. No hesitation. No shame. Just cold, quiet resolve. "I told you," she said softly. "The Watcher is always listening." In a flash, the lights went out. The room exploded into chaos. Shouts, movement, the scuffle of boots on hardwood. Maddox dove behind the mayor's desk as Laura fired 2 quick shots into the dark. Glass shattered. Someone screamed. When the emergency lights flickered on, Sheriff Dunley was on the floor, blood blooming across his chest. Granger and Howell were gone. Rachel Knox? Vanished. Laura limped to her feet, bleeding from a graze on her thigh. Maddox helped her up. "We can't let them finish it," she said, breath ragged. "They'll kill another girl." Maddox looked down at the ledger, his heart sinking. The next name was already written. Chloe Daniels, April 6th. Today was April 6th. They raced through the town like ghosts, wind howling past the cruiser windows as they tore down country roads toward the edge of the forest. The place marked the hollow on the ledger. According to the town's folklore, it was sacred ground, where the first settlers performed the original rite. When they arrived, torches flickered in the darkness, casting long, twisted shadows across the trees. A circle of people stood silently, cloaked, chanting in a low murmur that sent chills down Maddox's spine. At the center of the circle was Chloe Daniels, barely 16. Tied to a wooden structure, mouth gagged, eyes wide with terror. The mayor stood beside her, holding the ritual book, his voice deep and rhythmic. Maddox's jaw tightened. Then we make it count. They moved fast, cutting through the brush, splitting up to flank the group. Laura took the east. Maddox, the west. The chanting grew louder. Granger raised a knife. Maddox burst into the circle first. Drop it. Guess. Screams. Some of the cloaked figures scattered. Others ran straight at him. Laura emerged seconds later, gun blazing. One attacker went down. Another disappeared into the woods. Granger held the knife to Chloe's throat. Back away or she dies. No, Maddox said, stepping forward. This ends tonight. No more sacrifices. No more secrets. You don't understand, Granger snarled. If we stop, the town will rot. Everyone will suffer. She's not dying for your lies. Laura circled wide. Let her go, Granger. You don't have anyone left to protect you now. But Granger didn't let go. Instead, he smiled. You think this ends with me? The Watcher is bigger than Halbrook. Bigger than me. Bigger than any of you. Then he slashed at Chloe's neck. Maddox fired. The shot rang out like thunder through the forest. Granger collapsed. The knife dropped. Chloe screamed, but she was alive. The blade had missed. Laura rushed in to untie her as Maddox checked the mayor's pulse. The ritual was over. The sun rose over Halbrook for the first time in what felt like years. The aftermath was messy. The sheriff's office was gutted. Multiple arrests were made, names that shocked the town. Teachers. Bankers. Church elders. The rot had gone deep. But now it was exposed. The victims' names were read aloud at a town memorial. Jane Delaney's parents, tearful but resolute, finally got their closure. Chloe Daniels? She lived. And her survival broke the cycle. As for Maddox and Laura, they stayed long enough to see the trials begin. To make sure the truth wasn't buried like it always had been. But Halbrook was no longer quiet. It was a town with a past. And now it had to face it.